This is a message to the Isle of Man residents. I'll be there in a matter of days now, but something's come up that I just had to make this video. And basically, all the calculations that your wind power is based on are wrong. And I want you to stop and just take a look at this. You've really got to stop this development because you're going to waste an awful lot of money. Now, I've been sent email with a lady called Lizzie, who seems to be in charge of this transition. And I'm sorry, but she has the calculations wrong. Now, I also understand from a chap called Julian, who phoned in and spoke to her on the radio, that he made this point, so it's not just me, that your load factors are completely wrong for the wind, which means how much power you're getting out. Completely wrong. And she made some comments which again are wrong. So I want to now very quickly explain where your calculations are wrong, and why you've now got to stop this madness before you spend another penny, because you're about to get into all sorts of issues, spend a lot of money, and you're not going to get what you're being told you will get. Here's the explanation. Lizzie answered one of the questions like this in the email exchange, and it starts off with, the higher the wind speed at a site, the higher the estimated output. That statement is factually incorrect, and that's where we're going to start this dissection. The basic physics of wind energy are this. The energy from wind varies with the speed of the wind to the power of 3. I'll make that untechnical for you. The wind is blowing at 30 miles per hour, and you double it to 60. The energy you actually produce then is 2 times 2 times 2, that's the power of 3 because you've doubled it, which is 8-fold. So the energy shoots up, and of course the wind turbine can't get there, it would blow up, so it shuts off. There is of course no way the actual turbine can handle this amount of energy, so very quickly the wind turbine has to shut down the wind vane and stop producing. There is a maximum speed when wind farms stop. So just more wind does not mean more energy. Very often it means none. Otherwise, you'll get none in another way, this way. And the converse is true. When you decrease the energy from, say, 20 to 10, you've halved it. And in the same way, you can reduce the energy by halving it, you can reduce the energy 8-fold. So wind vanes are designed to actually cope with optimum ranges of energy. Now at the higher energy level, and why her statement is totally incorrect, is there's too much energy very quickly, so the wind vane has to stop, otherwise the turbine will blow up. It's as simple as that. There is a maximum speed that you can operate wind vanes at. So the more wind, the more power is a totally incorrect statement, and shows a fundamental misunderstanding of the physics involved here. So what are the actual values here? Well, the speed limits. What are the typical wind speed limits? Well, the maximum is 25 meters a second, 90 kilometers an hour. That's 55 miles an hour. I'm old-fashioned now, working miles per hour. And the minimum is 3 meters a second, 19.8 kilometers an hour, which is about 12 miles per hour. So above 55 miles an hour. So let's take those dark, stormy nights when you've got storms. You won't be having any wind power at all. It'll shut down. And on those nice days, or the times when you have a still over the air, let's say a cold, chilly November night, and there's a high over the Isle of Man, and the wind drops below 12 miles an hour, forget it, you'll have no wind power at all. No energy at all coming from wind. And of course, this is why gas has to step in. It has to be ready all the time. There are other issues as well. So let's return to that answer in the email. I'm not sure what is meant when they say that Erstein was expected to have a wind speed of 10.3. There's no given wind speed. I'm assuming that's meant to be an average, but that is meaningless because it really does depend on the distribution around the average of the wind. It really is a meaningless figure, that. The expected energy yield, depending on wind farm design, was expected to be between 100 to 130 gigawatt hours a year, which is equivalent to 25 to 33% of the island's annual demand today. That is impossible. Let me explain why. These load factors, which is what percentage you get out of the perfect wind, are incredibly high. So I now have to go slightly technical to explain why and then compare them to everywhere else in the world, because somehow the Isle of Man is expected to get the best out of the wind than any other place on Earth. This is officially how load factors for wind farms are calculated, and I'll read it out. Calculated by multiplying the installed capacity, which is what we've done, that's how many it's rated, in this case 20 megawatts, by the number of hours in a year, which is we've done that, 24 hours in the day, 365 days in the year, and then multiplying this by DES NZ's long-term average load factor for onshore and offshore. And that, by the way, in the UK is 32.08%. with offshore obviously being much higher. And we express this as a fraction, i.e. in this case it's 0.32. And the source for these capacity factors is from the tables I previously published in my Isle of Man videos. So we'd expect from that source around about 27% to be the load factor. Lizzie has provided load factors of between 57 and 74%, incredibly high. So let's compare this to, let's say, take a wind farm in Scotland here. And this is a table of the Scottish wind farms and how much they've done in constraints and how much they've generated and how much they've had to discard. So let's now take a look at that and compare it to the first one on the list. It doesn't matter which one, to see what wind energy we're getting out of wind farms in Scotland. And Scotland's the highest wind factor, the highest load factor in the UK. Well, here we are. The Corrigarth Estate Wind Farm is a 69 megawatt onshore wind farm. 69 by 24 by 365 gives you 604 gigawatt hours a year. In 2020, they generated 111 gigawatt hours and they were paid not to generate 116. They actually therefore discarded as much as 51% of the wind, but they were paid for that, of course. That amounts to 111 plus 116 amounts to 227 gigawatt hours. That's what the yield was. And that is a 37.5% yield. That's a very good yield, by the way. Good year there, good yield. And the load factor was 37.5%. The following year, and this just demonstrates how it can change year to year, 97 and 18 added together, 115 gigawatt hours produced, but they only had a 19% load factor. That gives an average load factor over those 2 years of 28.25%. And guess what? What do the UK government state they should plan to get out of a Scottish onshore wind farm? And here it is. That's right, it's 28.4%. That is why people have to plan on wind over a number of years. They have to plan on established base for doing these wind farms. I've stated before, the Isle of Man has to apply by the principles of engineering and the laws of physics. There's no exceptions. It applies equally to the Isle of Man as the rest of the world. This, of course, means that the entire foundation, the entire mathematical basis of this wind farm project in the Isle of Man is incorrect. The maths are wrong. Lizzie has argued on Manx Radio that there aren't any constraint payments here. Well, that's right, but there's a misunderstanding because of a double counting that's been made. What she means by that is the maximum you can get out at any one time would be 20, and that's lower than your overnight demand. So you're not going to be into exceeding your overnight demand with just 20 megawatts. And she's correct on that. But what she's not allowed for is those figures I've just given you. I've added the constraints in. In other words, that's the total yield. So the 27% load factor includes any constraints. That's the total they're capable of in the year. And that is what's been misunderstood. But as a consequence of that, everything else goes out of kilter. Now, I am not blaming Lizzie for this. She is not an engineer. She doesn't have that training. But this is a fairly simple mistake, and whoever's advising her on this is simply wrong. What difference does this make? Well, it makes an enormous difference. All the claimed costings are wrong by a huge factor. And in addition to that, there are operational factors that are completely ignored. So CO2 reductions are being claimed that aren't real, because what they forget is what you have to do with the gas. In practice, the 20 megawatt wind farm you're planning to install will reduce your total island CO2 emissions by just 2%. Meanwhile, the manufacturer and installer of the wind farm will have given you a CO2 footprint debt lasting well over a decade. Claims like this are just pie in the sky. In this email response, Lizzie states that the source of electricity in the future for wind will be between 4 and 6 pence per kilowatt hour. Not to you, by the way, that ends up to you many times that, of course. This is like the wholesale price, the cost of production. So 4 to 6 pence a kilowatt hour. Well, that's based on her incorrect yield figures, which we know are way out, just way out, like a factor over 200% out. So that could be somewhere between 8 and 12p per kilowatt hour. It could be more expensive than the alternatives. You see, once you get the maths wrong at the foundation of this, everything is wrong. Now, having been given that figure, and on the basis that Lizzie has stated, it's 30 to 40 million for the project, including feasibility and design. And by the way, I think government projects always overrun, but let's take the 40 million. Interest on 40 million at the current borrowing rate I've used for the UK government is 1.88 million a year in interest, and at 27% load factor gives you 47 gigawatt hours a year, which is £34,000 per gigawatt hour, £34 per megawatt hour, 3.4 pence per kilowatt hour in interest alone. So there's Lizzie quoting 4p for the entire thing. Interest payments alone are 3.4p, and of course that's magnified. Now actually that is a major part of the cost that's been left out here. Now, coming from the Renewable Energy Foundation, a pro-renewables organisation, I'm going to share with you, and I've given you the link for it there, and it'll be in the description to this video. I'm going to share with you what they say, and they understand what's going on. And I quote, "This effect may have come as a surprise to many renewable supporters who expected that large wind fleets would buffer the United Kingdom against high gas prices. In fact, as well known to experienced analysts, and has been long predicted, a heavily renewable-based system becomes critically dependent on natural gas generation across all timescales from seconds to years, and in order to guarantee security of supply, the volume of gas consumed may fall, but paradoxically, the exposure to gas and its price increases. The addition of more wind power will do little or nothing to mitigate this effect, and will all but certainly intensify the problem. You can't have this mix." And in the UK over the last 5 years, had we operated on gas alone, we'd have saved £18 billion. That's rather than having a mix of gas and wind. Renewables are incredibly expensive, and I've tried to explain just a few of the points in this video. And for this, I'm going to assume I am totally wrong about CO2. I'm going to actually take your alarmist CO2 predictions and the effect they have on temperature. And I'm going to tell you how much of the future temperature you would lower, right, by going full blast on this, by going full blast with all your wind farms, etc. And the answer is 1/40th of 1 millionth of 1 degree. Is it worth it?